All right, today we are looking back at the 2022 rookie class and going back and amending our rankings. We're going to see how these guys that have completed their rookie season now fall out compared to what we had last year. But before we get started today, we're bringing you all kinds of Dynasty content this offseason to help you get a leg up over your league mates. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. We are going to try to do our best to bring you the best in-depth analysis of the guys from last year, of the guys coming up this year, and help you win your Dynasty leagues. Let's get started. So we're going to go through tier-wise and rank these guys. We'll also put numbers on them. But again, this is a tier-based ranking. So if you have guys in the same tier, I mean, I wouldn't get in our comments saying, oh, I put this guy and this guy. I'd flip-flop them, and this one should be over this one. If they're in the same tier, then that means we're probably taking them pretty evenly most of the time. And then everything else is just kind of secondary here. So we'll jump right into the rankings here. Starting in the 2022 rookie ranking, tier 1, we do have Garrett Wilson actually at number 1. And this is because Garrett Wilson, even with Zach Wilson as his quarterback.
Mike White,
guys.
And Joe the Flacco.
I mean, even with these guys, Garrett Wilson has had a spectacular rookie year. And I think you saw at Ohio State what kind of receiver that Garrett Wilson could turn out to be in the NFL. And for him to come in this year and really what's not been a great quarterback situation at all and do what he has done, I think, that paired with Breece's ACL injury we have seen enough. And then given the fact that Garrett Wilson is a wide receiver, they're going to last longer, they're going to maintain their value better. I think this was enough to give him the nod over Breece, who we have at number 2. So for Breece, this season, obviously very impressive until he gets hurt. But talk to us a little bit about the production we were seeing from Breece pre-injury here.
Yeah, I mean, pre-injury Breece Hall was Dynasty RB1. So he obviously, even after his injury, we'll throw it up on the screen, maintained his ADP pretty much. He only moved down by 1.7. And actually in our startups, he's only going one pick before, in our mock drafts that we get our ADP from, he's only going one pick before Garrett Wilson, who moved up 44 spots since last season. So, I mean, both of them incredible prospects in their own right. We just are willing to call our shot and take Garrett Wilson, who's the receiver. We think he'll maintain his value more long term, and even imagine Garrett Wilson getting a quarterback. He could really easily jump up into early second round.
Literally any quarterback.
Yeah, I mean you're looking. Yeah, seriously.
I mean, healthy Breece Hall could be there too, but we just think Garrett Wilson as a receiver would maintain that longer.
Yeah, absolutely. So then coming in at 3, we've got Kenneth Walker, and Kenneth Walker, obviously, if you had any intuition at all, you would have suspected that Rashad Penny was not going to last a full season for the Seattle Seahawks. So Kenneth Walker did get his shot as we, kind of predicted. And then looking at what he's done this year, 199 attempts for 936 yards. That's 4.7 yards per carry. He had 9 touchdowns on the year, and he's in Seattle, where I think is a very good landing spot for him in terms of fit, in terms of being able to potentially produce. But if you're looking at the first 4 games of the season, I mean, he really wasn't a workhorse back, wasn't the main guy. He got 8 attempts, 2 of those games, and then 3 and 4 the rest. So really, I mean, he's going to go down as getting 1,000 yards in 12 games here.
Yeah,
that is quite impressive, given the fact that if you're adding on those 5 games and then you're taking his yards per game at that point, I mean, he is sniffing 1,500 yards. That is not insignificant for a running back here. I mean, Kenneth Walker, as many concerns as we had about his receiving game, he did get 34 targets this year, most of those in, again, those 11, 12 games that he did play, and he had 26 receptions, not to mention 155 receiving yards. Now, no receiving touchdowns, so again, still limited in that capacity, but we were worried about his receiving upside as a whole, and it has turned out that he's being used in that aspect of the game, and he has produced some in that aspect of the game. So while I think there are some better overall running back options in Dynasty, I think it would be unfair to put him anywhere other than tier 1 here.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to point out, though, that last year in 17 games, Jonathan Taylor only had 40 receptions. So if you extrapolate Kenneth Walker to a full 17-game season as the workhorse, why is it to stop us from valuing him, and Jonathan Taylor accordingly? Like, right side by side moving forward.
Sure. Other than the pretty gaping discrepancy in talent, yeah, that's a pretty good point.
Age, I think age makes up for it. Wear and tear.
I mean, Jonathan Taylor's only 23 right now.
Yeah, but
so,
I mean, 3 2,000-yard seasons.
22. So I still pretty easily take Jonathan Taylor over Kenneth Walker. That being said, when you're comparing Kenneth Walker to other rookies, like there's really not a reason you don't put him in tier 1. So All right, looking down at tier 2 now. This is where we're going to start seeing all these wide receivers trickle in. And just a spoiler alert, our next 8 guys here are going to be receivers across a couple tiers here. So looking at Chris Olave, tell me a little bit about what you've liked from Chris Olave this season, why he is in this tier 2 at the top of this here, and how he has come in and immediately produced with the Saints.
Yeah, I mean, he's transcended one of the worst situations in the league in a horrible division.
Don't
I know
insult Andy Dalton.
everyone
like that.
loves to say that Andy Dalton's been so good, and PFF has ranked him QB4 this year. Like, shut up. If you watch the games, he's not very good.
Pro football frickery.
At all. So Olave has transcended that. He's had obviously an incredible season. When Michael Thomas was healthy, Olave was just better. He just was. So that's who they're moving with in the future. I think the reason we have him a tier below Garrett Wilson is just because
Wilson's probably the more well-rounded receiver.
More well-rounded. Wilson has transcended an even worse situation than Olave, and literally anyone that goes to the Jets next year will be better and will help Garrett Wilson produce more. We don't really know what's going to go on with Olave. The Saints aren't really in a position to get one of those top 3 quarterbacks we like here in 2023. They're probably going to be riding this quarterback carousel for a while, and that could affect Olave's production a bit.
Yeah, I mean, Garrett Wilson was probably one of the only receivers in the league with a worse quarterback situation. I mean, Drake London, the next guy, had one too. But, I mean, Garrett Wilson in 15 games had 996 reception yards. Chris Olave in 13 had 940. And that, just last year we were shouting at people to value Devontae Smith higher because he had 900 yards in a full season. And, how good historically that is for a rookie. These guys are studs. They are cornerstone dynasty studs, and they should be going in the top 3 rounds.
And people learned their lesson from last year too, because these guys are going in the top 2 or 3 rounds. Devonta Smith, after his 1,000-yard season, you could still get in the 6th. So I mean, it is good to see the dynasty community kind of learn their lesson and gravitate more towards valuing these very productive rookie receivers. It does suck for us not being able to roster them.
Yeah, those are really nice values.
But again, the 2 guys that have really just kind of competed for that top wide receiver spot among rookies. And then you've got, Drake London. And with Drake London, I think, he's had a very serviceable rookie year. He had 750 yards so far. He's one more game to play. Only 4 touchdowns, which I'd like to see that go up. But he's only 21. He obviously was the 8th pick in the draft. He was the first receiver off the board in this class. And, with Drake London, there is something to be said about the Falcons being probably the worst fantasy player team this year. I mean, maybe ever. Arthur Smith looks at your fantasy team and says, I don't give a crap about your points. I don't care that Kyle Pitts sucks. I don't care that Drake London sucks. I'm not going to throw them the ball. I'm going to use the crappiest quarterbacks I can. We're going to scheme in the worst possible way for fantasy, and you're going to suck for it. And that's exactly what happened. Anybody that had Kyle Pitts really felt the effects of that. And with Drake London, I think for him to come out and even put up 750 yards, for him to even get 70 receptions, I'm looking at
really
this
impressive.
As an absolute win.
Again, historically notable, 750 yards as a rookie.
And a lot of the issues with him, given his size at 6'4", a lot of the issues with him were going to be, his being able to beat cornerbacks down the field. And I actually think we saw a little bit of that with Drake London this year in terms of kind of expanding his game. We knew he was a pretty good route runner, but I don't think he was just your prototypical big guy. I think he actually did some good work against NFL competition this year. So I think there's a lot I think Drake London is a guy that he might end up being a value because he had a little bit less production this year. So now we're going to move down into tier 3. So tell me a little bit about why we have Treylon Burks here and why we have him over Christian Watson, because I'm sure we'll get a little bit of pushback on this.
Yeah, I mean, aside from the fact that Burks went a whole half round ahead of Christian Watson, I think says a lot about what the NFL thought of him going into this season. And another less than ideal QB situation you have with Burks, not to mention he was just struggling with injury for the whole year. A lot of unfortunate things. I mean, turf toe. He got knocked out, that really nasty looking hit to the head when he caught that touchdown a few weeks back. But we watch our fair share of Titans football, unfortunately, because we have to watch the Colts play them twice a year, and we can't stand them. But
suck.
Every time I watch Treylon Burks, I'm so impressed. I think a lot of the questions going into this year were, his route running isn't as good as Garrett Wilson, Olave, London, which I think is merited and is true. But we were like, how is he really going to take that next step in the NFL? Is he really going to be able to use his athleticism and his speed and his hands to sort of transcend and get over that less elite route running ability? And I think he's proven that he can. Some of the catches that he's made this season have been incredible, vertically, and just like when it comes to his hands, like he just has really good hands.
So,
and I think from a production standpoint, he let us down. He did,
Sure.
but he's way better than Robert Woods, who everyone thought was going to do something there. The receiving volume just wasn't there in Tennessee this year.
absolutely.
So in terms of athleticism, I think you got to love what you see from Burks, and the fact that they gave up A.J. Brown to go get him, even though they just fired their GM at Tennessee, I think that does speak volumes about what he can do and the commitment level that Tennessee has for him in the future.
Yeah. You're looking at their yards per route run, which just talks about how efficient a receiver is. Treylon Burks had 2.16 yards per route run, which is good for 24th in the NFL. And if you look at the best receiver in this class, Garrett Wilson, he had 2.14. So 2.6 for Burks, 2.14 for Garrett Wilson. So they are both in that, like, already as rookies in the top 25 in the league. And that is exactly what you like to see, where Treylon Burks may not be the most polished route runner. He may not be the most skilled player, but he is proving that he can still be a dominant force in the NFL. And as he improves over the next few years, which he will, he's really a value right now, especially in startup drafts.
I think you nailed it. Part of being a good dynasty player, part of being a good fantasy player is being able to look past the surface level immediate production and into things like efficiency. That was going to be my main talking point with Burks, and that's why we're giving him the nod over Watson. If you really look at his efficiency this year and what he was able to do when he was on the field, and I know it's important that he's on the field. We don't think he's injury prone. We think he had a rough year. And again, people were shorting him because he had asthma, and look how that turned out. You're looking at his efficiency, what he did when he was on the field. It is very impressive. And I think his skill set will allow him to better transcend any type of rougher situation than Christian Watson's will. So if Christian Watson is looking at playing without Aaron Rodgers, I think that's really going to take a hit on Christian Watson. Now with Treylon Burks, he's obviously not playing with an elite level quarterback at all by any means right now, because Tannehill is just complete absolute trash garbage. And next year, who knows? It could be Tannehill. If it's Malik Willis, it's like, oh my gosh. Just if it's Dobbs, you're like, what's going on? So who knows what the Titans are going to do at QB? And to me, Burks is more well-rounded in terms of his skill set. It's going to allow him to be able to get past that situationally. And then Christian Watson, he has really, really flashed this year, and that's been really encouraging. Athletically, he's a freaking freak. He is tall. He is very fast. He's obviously been, as you've seen, a downfield threat for Rodgers. But one thing that we kind of mentioned with Christian Watson was that he was slightly touchdown dependent. And although that has cooled off a little bit, and we've seen him work a little bit production-wise outside of just scoring touchdowns, which has been very encouraging to see, his touchdown rate still is, from a production standpoint, is still going to be fairly high. So, it's
20%
exactly
right now.
So
from 35 receptions to 7 receiving touchdowns.
So with that, you have to be a little bit nice, quick math. You have to be a little bit cautious with CWAT, and while I really believe in the athleticism, I really believe in the prospect that he is, and I really like where he's going, actually, in some of these rookie drafts. I think ADP has him nailed in around the 5th or 6th round right now, maybe a little bit later. I will take Burks over him still. You guys have anything else on CWAT? I mean, he's obviously had a pretty good year.
Yeah, I just tweeted out yesterday that I said Christian Watson is throwing the window wide open on the one of the last buy windows we might have in Dynasty. We've already seen what he's capable of. Over a month stretch, he might have even been wide receiver 1 overall. I don't really know how to calculate that, but we've all seen how incredible he was. We've seen how dominant he was over that 4-week stretch, maybe even 5 weeks. I don't have it right in front of me, but don't overthink that, because we've seen maybe he doesn't even need a great quarterback. Maybe he could, similar to Burks, with a bad quarterback, because of how dominant he is as an athlete, create on his own. So I wouldn't question it with Christian Watson, especially.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about Kenny Pickett, what you've seen from him this year that you really like, and why we kind of have him in this 3rd tier, not any higher.
Yeah, Pickett's been a very competent quarterback at Pittsburgh, really being the bridge in the transition from Big Ben in Pittsburgh to whatever QB ends up being there long term, which could be Pickett. I think from an NFL standpoint, Pickett fits the Steelers system pretty well, and I think he'll continue to improve. We always knew that his floor was going to be higher than at least the other rookie quarterbacks at the time that we were looking at, and that he was the most NFL ready. Clearly, he was the only one NFL ready and would ever be relevant in the NFL from the 2022 class.
Sure.
He makes smart decisions. He doesn't put the ball in harm's way often. He isn't anything flashy. And I think in terms of fantasy, like, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about dynasty value, which is consistent fantasy performance over a long period of time. And I don't think Pickett will ever have the upside to be a consistent quarterback one or anything really close.
Yeah.
I personally don't think.
No.
So now there is value in the security of him being there in Pittsburgh, where Pittsburgh probably will never have a really high draft pick. They'll probably have to stick with Pickett.
Yeah.
So that is nice. That's nice with him, and that's why we have him in the third tier.
Yeah, and so dropping down to these fourth and fifth tiers here real quick, we'll just kind of rotate these players off per person here. But I'll start with JMO. With JMO, the reason he's not in this third tier, I think, is because he really hasn't flashed yet. I mean, you've seen, like, if you want to call one play or even two plays, if you count yesterday, his little end around that he got 25 yards on, if you want to count those as flashes, then I guess he maybe flashed a tiny bit. But JMO, there's still, you're going to have to see how he's going to get involved there with Amon-Ra St. Brown clearly being the wide receiver one there, clearly being an elite wide receiver prospect and player now in the NFL at 23 years old. It's going to be interesting to see how JMO fits in there. I think that's kind of why we have him down here. But you like Jahan Dotson, and he has...
just one thing on Jamison Williams real quick. I think our ranking with him here is more a nod to just how good of a prospect he is, and even... in our ADP, we'll throw it up on screen again this week, how good he has retained his value, how well he's retained that. He's moved up 30 spots since last year. His ADP last year was 88th, and right now it's 57th. So he's still going in the late fifth round, moving up, actually, even with a really underwhelming year. So, yeah, Jahan Dotson.
Yeah, with Dotson, he was... I knew he wasn't the best receiver going into the 2022 class, but he was just my favorite. He had a special place in my heart. Watched him a lot in the Big Ten. I saw the most of him, and he really proved what he can do in another terrible quarterback situation in Washington, where there's not much targets to go around. They're playing with Heineke for 3/4 of the season, and Carson Wentz comes back this week and throws 3 interceptions, and he truly, by definition, flashed earlier this at the start of the year before he got injured. And again, the reason we don't have him as high as these other guys like Burks, like Christian Watson, are because he's playing behind Terry McLaurin. And while we don't love Terry, and we don't think that he'll really ever have the upside that people think he could have, that does affect Dotson's target share. That does affect the amount of volume that he's going to get game in and game out, because Terry did just sign that 3-year deal this offseason. So hit for the next 3-4 years, Dotson will be stuck behind that. Could Dotson ever surpass that? Potentially. He has the draft capital. He has better draft capital than Terry does. He could grow to be a better receiver than Terry. Who knows? But I mean, until Washington gets a quarterback, until they get all this stuff figured out, I don't really see it fantasy wise. It's not great upside with Dotson, though he's an amazing NFL receiver.
Yeah, and even similar to Christian Watson right now, he has almost a 25% touchdown share.
Yeah,
so that's something you want to be wary of. We know how much that fluctuates season to season.
Yeah, the yards will probably go up for him next season, and the touchdowns will go down.
George Pickens, Simon?
Yeah, I just tweeted out about George Pickens yesterday as well. Speaking of Terry McLaurin, I said George Pickens is the new Terry McLaurin. He's a super talented receiver. We all liked him coming out of college. He's really good, especially young. But he's going to be overdrafted for the next couple of years, probably just because of his situation, and he probably will not be able to perform. Similar to, like I said, Terry McLaurin and DJ Moore. I wouldn't say he should ever even sneak into high-end dynasty wide receiver too, because it's just not looking like Kenny Pickett will be a long-term starter there, and I don't think he can ever propel George Pickens to the point where he needs to be in order to be worth being valued as highly as he is. But that's not to say the talent is there. He flashes in really incredible things. But the weird thing is he struggles with the really simple things. Like you saw him last week drop a touchdown in the end zone, like literally just go through his hands. So that's not to say I don't think he's a talented player. I just, this is as high as we're willing to put him.
Yeah, and I think the biggest name that's really keeping him from being higher, like we said, has got to be Deontay Johnson. I mean, Deontay Johnson has had a down year. I remember going into the 2022 season, we had him as a high-end wide receiver 2 or a low-end wide receiver 1, and he completely disappointed. But a lot of that is just because of the volatility of touchdowns and how unpredictable they are, and he had, like, none.
Yeah, I mean, he's
none
very
this year.
little.
Not to mention there was sort of just a crazy situation with the wide receivers there. Claypool leaving mid-season. Obviously, the transition from Big Ben to Kenny Pickett, there's going to be some growing pains there. I'd see Deontay Johnson kind of getting back to what he was this next season, and maybe Pickens could take a step back or he could maintain. We'll see. But Deontay Johnson is going to be a really big reason for why Pickens could be kept from producing at a high level.
Yeah, and then the last guy in this tier is Dameon Pierce, which we almost didn't even put him in this tier. And obviously you saw Dameon Pierce with a good start to the season with a very productive run there. And I had people dunking on me in all of my leagues saying that we totally missed on Dameon Pierce. Look what he did. He's a star, blah, blah, blah. And he's like the RB20 now or something. I mean, look, and Dameon Pierce, even given that, has had a pretty productive year for a guy with that draft capital. He's had a pretty productive year. But why would you take Dameon Pierce over any of these receivers? And we said this last year, and nothing has changed. I mean, not only did he not produce at an RB1 level like some people were dunking on me, were saying he would, but we've seen it time and time again. I think this is very comparable to the James Robinson situation where you come out, you have this low draft capital, and then you just get replaced. And it's not like we're just pulling this out of our butts. I mean, this is something that we've seen, and there's data to support that these guys with the day 3 capital, I mean, historically, they're not really keeping their jobs very long, particularly after year 1. So if you're going to be surprised when the Texans draft a back this year, I mean, I wouldn't, because it's a really deep running back class, and a lot of these guys are very talented dudes. And then for Dameon Pierce, I just don't think he's got the capital to stay there long term, and because he's a running back.
And he's got better capital than like James Robinson did or Elijah Mitchell. Elijah Mitchell went in the 6th round, and James Robinson was undrafted. I think the biggest comp here though is got to be Michael Carter, because he went right around where Dameon Pierce went in the 4th round just recently, and then you obviously see them drafting Breece Hall. Are the Texans going to draft a running back this year? Maybe not. We'll see. Not, yeah. But the point stands.
It does, and you can go in the comments and complain about this if you want to, but honestly, I mean, those probably aren't comments we're going to reply to. We know people like Dameon Pierce, we know what he's done, and we've had him here the whole time, so we're not going to change our tune on this, and I'm not exactly sure that you should try to convince us to.
Yeah,
so
let's play a little game here, though, real quick. So both of these running backs are 22. They'll be 23 next season. One of them went at the 402, one of them went at the 508, both in this last year's class. Which one are you taking? The one who, in 13 games, put up on 220 attempts, 939 rush yards, so that's good for 4.3 yards per carry, or the one who went at the 508, same age, in 14 games, so one more, had 166 attempts, so a lot, fewer attempts, but put up 817 yards on 4.9 yards per carry.
I'll take the efficiency.
I mean, I'll take the better player there.
Yeah, I mean,
which is pretty clear which one's the better player.
The more efficient one, but that's Tyler Algier. And can you believe that people are still they're being drafted so far apart in Dynasty right now? Probably 6-7 rounds, if I were to guess. I watched a video. Full Tilt Dynasty Podcast Network did a video on Tyler Algier versus Dameon Pierce, and that's where they pointed out the similarities. Both late round running backs, and one of them is being valued in incredibly more, at such a higher level, and they really have similar production.
Yeah, and they have the same dynasty outlook. In terms of draft capital and production, it's in team situation, it's looking like Tyler Algier and Dameon Price are going to have the same dynasty outlook, which is not very long term.
Excuse you, who? Dameon who?
Damian Pierce. Did I say Damian Harris?
Price.
Damian Price. Oof, that's
Same
rough.
difference.
Anyways, you can get one for literally half the
Let's
price.
get into that now. Tier 5, very quickly here. Rashad White, I think I like him long-term more than Damian Pierce, actually, just because of his skill set.
Same.
But it looks like Fournette might be on his way out in Tampa Bay, which I wouldn't be surprised if he stayed because he's fat net. But at the same time, Rashad White, he has the receiving upside. He's looked fairly good. He's produced a little bit in his first year. I think there's a lot to like about Rashad White, and if you wanted to argue to put him higher, I think you could. So, James Cook.
He's got the best draft capital of this little chunk of receivers that we have at the tail end here.
Running backs, yeah.
He's shown that he can catch the ball and that he can run in wide open spaces that the offensive line gives him. And
Nice.
that's about it. I don't really know what you think his ceiling is.
Spaces.
Yeah, I mean, what did you expect? James Cook is a guy, if Singletary goes away, James Cook is a guy who could jump up next year.
Yeah.
I mean, with increased opportunity.
With James Cook's value right now, honestly,
But I mean, he didn't do anything.
it's fine. It's fine now.
He had a good game or two. I mean, outside of that, not really a ton.
Yeah,
So.
well, one of my favorite things about James Cook is I was watching a game this year. I think it was a Thanksgiving game, maybe when they played Detroit, and Tony Romo was commentating, and he was talking about, James Cook, this is a guy that has a really promising career in the NFL, and he's shown some flashes here and there, and if they use him right in the passing game and the running game, he could really go off and be really special here in Buffalo. And literally seconds later, James Cook just whiffs a block. And that is exactly why he doesn't get the snap share that you want him to.
Yeah.
So he's going to have to improve on a lot of things if he's going to want to have any sort of success in the NFL long term.
Tyler Algier.
We talked about Tyler Algier.
Greg Dulcich is a guy that, we watched at the Combine last year, and we really, really liked him.
He was our second tight end.
And behind Trey McBride and a 2023 second. But anyways, with Dulcich, is something we called. We really were high on Dulcich. We drafted a lot of him between the three of us. I have quite a few shares. I think you guys do too.
Same.
And it's really paid off. So him to flash his rookie year has been really impressive and deserving of a spot in this. And then we put Brian Robinson in at the end of Tier 5 here. And we really only put him in here so you wouldn't complain so much. But I know people are still going to. Look, in all reality,
market value.
In all reality, we'd probably take Alec Pierce. I mean, I would prefer him. I think all
of us
three
would
prefer him.
Let's compare Brian Robinson real quick to Damian Pierce and Tyler Algier.
Sure. Yeah.
He went in the fake third round, so the extra ones, the extra picks that
compensatory
got
picks,
added this last year.
Yeah.
So he's pretty much a fourth round pick. And through 11 games, had 188 attempts for 710 rushing yards for the worst out of those three guys at 3.9 yards per carry. And even worse than that, he had fewer receptions than either of them with 9.
Huh.
So he's getting less than 1 reception a game. Yeah.
And of those three teams, Washington is the one running the true committee.
3 people committee. I mean, why would you want to start any of those running backs, but especially Brian Robinson? I mean, don't you think there's a reason that Brian Robinson did absolutely nothing at Alabama until his last year?
Yeah.
I mean, he had such a low breakout. He doesn't bring a ton to the table skill-wise. He's big and he's a hard runner, and Ron Rivera likes that. But to be honest, Ron Rivera, historically, I mean, people are going to argue he's a good coach, and I think I would grant you that. But personnel-wise, I mean, I see him rotating in these 3 running backs and Gibson consistently being the most talented and most productive one, and I just really question why Brian Robinson's even starting here. So I think if there's a coaching change there, you might even see Brian Robinson become irrelevant pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah. And, honestly, at this point, are you taking Brian Robinson or Pacheco?
Probably Pacheco. I mean, he's on the Chiefs offense. If you're going to be on a committee, let's make it a good committee.
I
right?
agree. And I'm taking Rashad White over both of them.
Absolutely.
Looking at
hands
45
down.
receptions this last year.
Yeah. Again, I think you could make an argument to do White higher. So, not a ton of notable, exclusions here, maybe Alec Pierce. I'm sure you guys will think of some. Drop them in the comments. But that's kind of our redone 2022 rookie rankings, how things have sorted out in our eyes after this first year for these guys. So let us know what you think in the comments, what you agree with, what you disagree with, unless it's Damian Pierce and we just really we get it. You want him higher, blah, blah, blah. I mean, at that point, it is what it is. But make sure you subscribe to the channel. We've got all kinds of new Dynasty content coming out all the time, especially during the offseason. It's now Dynasty season. We're looking back and evaluating these rookies, these young guys that are still under 24 years old that are going to help your Dynasty team, give you a cornerstone. We're going through evaluating them, evaluating this incoming class. We're dropping all kinds of new videos on the rookie classes, so make sure you subscribe. Make sure you like the video. As always, we really appreciate you watching, and thanks for joining us.